How did one dynasty shape China for 2,000 years, and then lose everything? Before we begin, like, share, and subscribe. Chapter 1: China Before the Han. Imagine living in a world where war never seemed to end. A world where kingdoms rose and fell in a matter of years, where armies marched across the countryside, and where powerful rulers dreamed of conquering everything under heaven. More than 2,000 years ago, China was not a single nation. Instead, it was divided into rival states constantly fighting for power. Cities were fortified, alliances were fragile, and entire generations grew up knowing only conflict. Yet from this chaos would emerge one of the greatest empires in history, the Han Dynasty. But before we can understand how the Han rose to power, we first need to explore the turbulent world that came before it. The story begins with the Zhou dynasty. For centuries, the Zhou ruled much of ancient China. Their authority rested on a powerful idea known as the mandate of heaven. According to this belief, heaven granted the right to rule to a just and capable leader. If a ruler became corrupt, cruel, or incompetent, heaven could take that mandate away and give it to someone else. This concept would shape Chinese politics for thousands of years. At first, the Zhou dynasty thrived. The kingdom expanded, agriculture prospered, and local nobles governed territories on behalf of the king. It was a system that brought stability to a vast region. But over time, cracks began to appear. The nobles grew wealthier and more powerful. Many controlled their own armies and increasingly ignored the commands of the royal court. The Zhou kings remained on the throne, but their influence slowly faded. Then in 771 BCE, disaster struck. Invaders attacked the Zhou capital, forcing the royal court to flee eastward. Although the dynasty survived, its authority never fully recovered. Real power now belonged to regional rulers, each determined to protect and expand their own territory. China entered an age of division, an age where alliances shifted constantly, and war became a way of life. Yet amid the chaos, something remarkable happened. Some of the greatest thinkers in Chinese history emerged during this period. They searched for answers to a question that affected everyone. How could peace be restored to a world consumed by conflict? One of these thinkers was Confucius. He believed society could be repaired through morality, education, and responsible leadership. Another was Laozi, whose teachings emphasized harmony with nature and the importance of following the natural order. Meanwhile, legalist thinkers such as Han Fei argued that strong laws and strict punishments were the only way to maintain order. Their ideas would influence generations of rulers. But philosophy alone could not stop the wars. As the centuries passed, the struggle for power intensified. Smaller states disappeared, swallowed by larger and more ambitious rivals. Eventually, 7 powerful kingdoms dominated the Chinese world. Among them was a state located in the west. At first, many underestimated it. But this kingdom was different. Chapter 2: Liu Bang and the Birth of the Han Dynasty. Not every empire is founded by a king. Some begin with a warrior, a noble, or a powerful general. The Han Dynasty began with a man who, by all appearances, had little chance of changing history. His name was Liu Bang. He was not born into wealth. He did not come from an ancient royal bloodline. He was not known as a brilliant scholar or an unbeatable military commander. Yet within a few decades, Liu Bang would overthrow rivals, survive one of the most brutal civil wars in Chinese history, and establish a dynasty that would shape China for centuries. His rise from commoner to emperor remains one of the most remarkable stories in world history. But to understand how Liu Bang achieved the impossible, we must first return to the final years of the Qin dynasty. The shadow of the Qin Empire. By the late 3rd century BCE, the Qin dynasty ruled a unified China. Its founder, Qin Shi Huang, had accomplished what generations of rulers had only dreamed of. After centuries of warfare, he conquered rival states and united the Chinese world under a single government. The achievement was extraordinary. Roads connected distant regions. Weights and measures were standardized. A common writing system helped improve administration. Large construction projects transformed the landscape. Yet beneath these accomplishments lay growing resentment. The Qin government imposed heavy taxes. Millions of people were forced into labor. Harsh laws punished even minor offenses. Entire families could suffer for the mistakes of a single individual. Many feared the government more than they respected it. While Qin Shi Huang lived, his authority kept opposition under control. But after his death in 210 BCE, the empire's weaknesses quickly became visible. The early life of Liu Bang. Liu Bang was born around 256 BCE in what is now eastern China. Unlike many famous rulers, his early life was relatively ordinary. Historical accounts describe him as charismatic, confident, and sometimes careless. He was known for enjoying conversation, drinking, and socializing more than hard work. By traditional standards, he did not seem destined for greatness. At one point, Liu Bang worked as a minor local official responsible for supervising laborers. His position gave him first-hand experience with the realities of Qin rule. He witnessed the burden that government policies placed upon ordinary people. According to legend, one incident changed the course of his life. While escorting a group of prisoners, several escaped. Under Qin law, losing prisoners could result in severe punishment. Rather than return and face likely execution, Liu Bang chose a different path. He released the remaining prisoners and became a fugitive. Whether every detail of the story is true remains uncertain. But what is clear is that Liu Bang soon found himself involved in the growing unrest spreading across the empire. The spark of rebellion. As Qin authority weakened, rebellions erupted throughout China. The first major uprising began in 209 BCE when two military officers, delayed by bad weather, realized they faced execution for failing to arrive on time. Since death awaited them regardless, they chose rebellion instead. Their revolt inspired others. Soon former nobles, local leaders, bandits, and ambitious adventurers raised their own armies. The empire that had seemed invincible only years earlier began to crack. Liu Bang joined the rebellion and quickly gained followers. His greatest strength was not military genius, but leadership. People trusted him. He treated allies with respect and often listened to advice. Unlike many rivals, he could attract talented supporters and keep them loyal. As his influence grew, so did his ambitions. The fall of the Qin dynasty. Rebel forces advanced across China. The Qin government struggled to respond. Internal conflicts weakened the court, while armies fought desperately to contain multiple uprisings. In 207 BCE, rebel forces captured the Qin capital. The dynasty that had united China collapsed after only 15 years of rule. But victory brought a new problem. Who would rule China now? The answer was far from obvious. Numerous leaders believed they deserved power. Among them, one man stood above all others. His name was Xiang Yu. Xiang Yu, the unmatched warrior. If Liu Bang was known for charisma and political skill, Xiang Yu was famous for military brilliance. A powerful commander from the former state of Chu, he gained a reputation as one of the greatest warriors of his age. His victories inspired fear throughout China. Many believed he was the natural successor to the fallen Qin Empire. Even Liu Bang recognized Xiang Yu's strength. At the time, few would have predicted that Liu Bang would eventually defeat him. Xiang Yu controlled larger armies. He possessed greater prestige. He enjoyed the support of many influential figures. Yet military strength alone does not guarantee political success. The struggle between these two men would determine the future of China. The Feast at Han Gate. One of the most famous episodes of this rivalry occurred at an event known as the Han Gate Banquet. After entering the Qin capital before Xiang Yu, Liu Bang alarmed his powerful rival. Some advisors urged Xiang Yu to eliminate him immediately. A banquet was arranged. Officially, it was a celebration. In reality, it may have been a trap. Historical accounts describe a tense gathering filled with suspicion and political maneuvering. At several moments, Liu Bang's life appeared to hang by a thread. Yet through diplomacy, luck, and assistance from allies, he escaped unharmed. The encounter became legendary. It also demonstrated an important truth. The contest for China had only begun. China divided once more. Instead of establishing a unified empire, Xiang Yu divided China into multiple kingdoms. He granted territories to various rulers, hoping to maintain control through a balance of power. Liu Bang received a distant and relatively poor region in the west. To many observers, this appeared to be a political setback. Yet the decision would prove to be a mistake. Far from the center of power, Liu Bang gained time. He strengthened his position, developed alliances, and prepared for future conflict. Meanwhile, dissatisfaction with Xiang Yu's rule grew. His decisions alienated potential supporters. Former allies became rivals. The fragile political order began to unravel. Before long, China was heading toward another civil war. The Chu-Han contention. The struggle between Liu Bang and Xiang Yu became known as the Chu-Han contention. For 4 years, from 206 to 202 BCE, China was consumed by conflict. Battles raged across vast territories. Cities changed hands repeatedly. Alliances shifted as leaders calculated their chances of survival. Although Xiang Yu often won on the battlefield, Liu Bang excelled in other areas. He surrounded himself with talented advisors. One of the most important was Zhang Liang, whose political guidance proved invaluable. Another was Han Xin, one of the greatest generals in Chinese history. Han Xin delivered a series of victories that steadily weakened Xiang Yu's position. Liu Bang understood something many rulers overlooked. An empire cannot be built by one person alone. Success depends on the ability to recognize talent and use it effectively. This became one of his greatest advantages. The final battle. By 202 BCE, Xiang Yu's situation had become desperate. His armies suffered repeated defeats. Former allies abandoned him. Han forces gradually surrounded his remaining troops. The final confrontation occurred near Gaixia. According to tradition, Han soldiers sang songs from Xiang Yu's homeland during the siege. Hearing familiar melodies from every direction, Xiang Yu believed his territory had already fallen. Morale collapsed. Realizing defeat was inevitable, Xiang Yu attempted to break through enemy lines. After a final stand, he took his own life rather than be captured. One of history's greatest warriors was dead. The road to power now belonged to Liu Bang. The founding of the Han Dynasty. Following his victory, Liu Bang declared himself emperor. The year was 202 BCE. A new dynasty had been born. The Han Dynasty inherited a land exhausted by decades of warfare. Cities needed rebuilding. Agriculture required restoration. Political stability remained fragile. Many rulers would have focused on revenge or personal glory. Liu Bang chose a different path. He understood that people wanted peace more than conquest. Taxes were reduced. Punishments became less severe. Efforts were made to restore economic life. The new emperor also recognized the strengths of the Qin system. Rather than dismantle everything his predecessors had built, he preserved many administrative reforms while governing in a less oppressive manner. This balance would become a defining feature of the Han state. A commoner becomes emperor. Liu Bang's rise was extraordinary. He had not been born a prince. He had not inherited an empire. He achieved power through persistence, adaptability, and the ability to inspire loyalty. His story resonated deeply with later generations. It demonstrated that leadership was not determined solely by noble birth. Talent, judgment, and determination could also shape history. The dynasty he founded would endure for more than 4 centuries. Its influence would become so profound that many Chinese people would eventually identify themselves simply as the Han people. Yet when Liu Bang first ascended the throne, none of that was guaranteed. The empire remained fragile. Enemies still existed. Challenges lay ahead. The survival of the Han Dynasty would depend on whether its founder could transform military victory into lasting stability. That challenge would define the next chapter in the story of one of history's greatest empires. Chapter 3: Building a New Empire. The year was 202 BCE. After years of brutal civil war, the smoke of battle was finally beginning to clear across China. The mighty Qin dynasty had fallen. Its dream of unifying the land had succeeded, but its harsh rule had also sparked widespread rebellion. In the chaos that followed, countless factions fought for control. Only one man emerged victorious. His name was Liu Bang. A former peasant who had risen through determination, political skill, and military alliances, Liu Bang now stood as the ruler of a new dynasty. He would become known as Emperor Gyazu, the first emperor of the Han Dynasty. But winning the throne was only the beginning. The greater challenge lay ahead. China had been devastated by years of war. Cities had been damaged, farmland abandoned, and countless lives lost. The people were exhausted, and the empire remained fragile. If Liu Bang failed to rebuild the country, the Han Dynasty could collapse just as quickly as it had risen. The future of China depended on what happened next. A nation in ruins. When Emperor Gyazu took power, he inherited a land that desperately needed stability. Decades of conflict had drained resources and shattered local economies. Many farming communities had been destroyed or abandoned during the wars. Agriculture formed the backbone of ancient Chinese society. Without productive farms, there could be no reliable food supply, no stable tax base, and no long-term prosperity. The new emperor understood this reality. Rather than immediately launching military campaigns or grand construction projects, he focused on recovery. Taxes were reduced. Labor obligations were eased. Farmers were encouraged to return to their fields. The government worked to restore agricultural production and bring normal life back to the countryside. These policies may not have seemed dramatic, but they played a crucial role in stabilizing the empire. For ordinary people, peace was often more valuable than conquest. Learning from Qin's mistakes. One of the most important decisions facing Emperor Gyazu involved the legacy of the Qin dynasty. The Qin had achieved something extraordinary. For the first time in history, they had united China under a single government. They standardized weights, measures, currency, and writing systems. They built roads, strengthened defenses, and established centralized administration. These achievements were too valuable to abandon. Yet the Qin had also become notorious for their harshness. Heavy taxation, forced labor, and severe punishments created widespread resentment. Many people viewed the Qin government as oppressive. Geazu faced a difficult question. How could he preserve the strengths of Qin rule without repeating its failures? His solution was balance. The Han retained much of the Qin administrative system while governing with a lighter touch. Officials continued to oversee provinces and collect taxes, but punishments became less severe. Government authority remained strong, yet the emperor sought to appear more approachable and humane. This combination would become one of the foundations of Han success. The challenge of regional power. Although Geazu was emperor, his authority was not yet absolute. Many of the generals and allies who had helped him win the civil war expected rewards. To secure their loyalty, Geazu granted large territories to trusted supporters and family members. These regional rulers controlled significant land and resources. At first, the arrangement seemed practical. The empire was vast, and local leaders could help maintain order. However, the system carried serious risks. Powerful regional rulers might eventually challenge the central government. History had already demonstrated this danger during the decline of the Zhou dynasty. As years passed, some kings became increasingly ambitious. The Han court responded carefully. While avoiding immediate confrontation, the government gradually strengthened central authority and limited the independence of regional powers. This process would continue for generations. The balance between local autonomy and imperial control remained one of the most important political challenges of the dynasty. Establishing the imperial government. Building a lasting empire required more than military victories. The Han needed an effective government capable of managing millions of people across vast territories. The emperor stood at the top of the system. His authority extended throughout the empire, and his decisions carried the force of law. Beneath him served a growing bureaucracy of officials. These administrators collected taxes, enforced laws, supervised public works, and communicated imperial policies to local communities. Record-keeping became increasingly important. Officials documented population figures, agricultural production, tax revenues, and military resources. This information allowed the government to make decisions based on practical realities rather than guesswork. Communication remained a challenge in an age without modern technology. Messages often traveled by horse along roads connecting distant regions. Even so, the Han administration proved remarkably effective for its time. Its structure would influence Chinese government for centuries. Restoring the economy. Economic recovery became one of the dynasty's highest priorities. War had disrupted trade routes and damaged local markets. Many communities struggled to rebuild. The Han government encouraged agricultural expansion and invested in infrastructure. Roads were repaired. Canals improved transportation. Trade slowly increased between regions. Markets began to flourish once again. Farmers sold surplus crops. Artisans produced tools, pottery, and textiles. Merchants carried goods across growing commercial networks. As economic activity increased, government revenues also improved. This allowed the state to fund administration, maintain order, and support future development. Prosperity would not return overnight. But step by step, the foundations of a stable economy were being rebuilt. The importance of agriculture. No resource mattered more to the Han Dynasty than food. The vast majority of people worked as farmers. Their labor sustained the entire empire. Good harvests meant stability. Poor harvests could lead to unrest, famine, and rebellion. Recognizing this reality, The government paid close attention to agricultural policies. Land cultivation was encouraged. Irrigation systems were maintained. Taxes were often adjusted to avoid placing excessive burdens on farming communities. The emperor's legitimacy depended partly on his ability to ensure the well-being of rural populations. When crops flourished, confidence in the government grew. When harvests failed, people often questioned whether heaven still supported the ruling dynasty. The connection between agriculture and political stability remained deeply rooted in Chinese culture. Building legitimacy. Military victory alone could not guarantee lasting rule. The Han Dynasty needed legitimacy. People needed reasons to believe that the new government deserved their loyalty. The concept of the mandate of heaven played a crucial role. According to traditional belief, heaven granted authority to rulers who governed wisely and justly. The collapse of the Qin dynasty was widely interpreted as proof that the Qin had lost heaven's favor. The Han presented themselves as the rightful successors. Their rulers emphasized moderation, compassion, and concern for the welfare of the people. Whether these ideals were always achieved is another matter. But politically, the message was powerful. The Han were not simply conquerors. They portrayed themselves as restorers of order after a period of chaos. This image strengthened public support and reinforced imperial authority. A new era begins. By the end of Emperor Gyeongsu's reign, the foundations of the Han Empire had been firmly established. The country was more stable. Agriculture was recovering. Government institutions were functioning. Trade was expanding. The threat of immediate collapse had largely passed. Yet many challenges remained. Powerful regional rulers still existed. Foreign threats lurked beyond China's borders. Questions about philosophy, governance, and imperial authority continued to shape political debates. Future emperors would face these issues in different ways. Some would achieve remarkable success. Others would make costly mistakes. But thanks to the groundwork laid during these early years, the Han Dynasty had survived its most vulnerable period. The empire was no longer simply a victor emerging from civil war. It was becoming one of the most influential civilizations the world had ever seen. And in the generations ahead, the Han would transform China in ways that would echo across history for more than 2,000 years. Chapter 4: Life in Han China. When people think about the Han Dynasty, they often picture emperors, generals, and grand palaces. History tends to focus on rulers and battles. Yet the true strength of the Han Empire did not come from its emperors alone. It came from millions of ordinary people. Farmers working vast fields, merchants traveling dangerous roads, craftsmen shaping metal, wood, and silk, teachers passing knowledge to the next generation, families raising children and maintaining traditions that had existed for centuries. Together, these people formed the foundation of Han society. Their labor fed the empire, supported its economy, and helped transform the Han Dynasty into one of the most prosperous civilizations of the ancient world. To understand the Han Dynasty, we must step away from the imperial court and explore everyday life. What did people eat? Where did they live? How did they work? What were their hopes, fears, and responsibilities? The answers reveal a fascinating world that was both familiar and remarkably different from our own. A society built on hierarchy. Han China was organized according to a clear social hierarchy. Everyone had a place within society, and expectations often depended on one's status. At the top stood the emperor, regarded as the son of heaven. His authority extended across the empire, and he was believed to serve as a link between heaven and the human world. Below him were nobles, high-ranking officials, and wealthy landowners. These individuals possessed significant influence and often controlled large estates. Next came scholars and government administrators. Education was highly respected in Han society, and learned individuals enjoyed considerable prestige. Merchants, despite sometimes accumulating great wealth, occupied a lower social position. Many officials viewed trade with suspicion, believing that merchants profited from the labor of others rather than producing goods themselves. At the bottom of society were laborers, servants, and various groups with limited rights. Yet the largest segment of the population by far consisted of farmers. Although farming was physically demanding, agricultural workers were often regarded as essential members of society because they produced the food that sustained everyone else. The life of a farmer. For most people living during the Han Dynasty, life revolved around agriculture. The rhythm of existence followed the seasons. Planting, cultivating, harvesting, preparing for winter, then beginning the cycle once again. Farmers typically rose before sunrise and spent long hours working the land. Families often labored together, with every member contributing according to age and ability. Fields produced crops such as millet, wheat, rice, and various vegetables. In northern regions, millet and wheat were common staples. In the south, rice cultivation became increasingly important. A successful harvest could mean security and prosperity. A poor harvest could bring hunger and hardship. Natural disasters represented a constant threat. Floods, droughts, insects, and disease could destroy months of labor in a matter of days. Because agriculture was so important, the government closely monitored food production and often invested in irrigation systems designed to improve yields. For many families, survival depended on the unpredictable forces of nature. Homes and family life. Most Han families lived in modest homes built from locally available materials. In rural areas, houses were often constructed from wood, packed earth, and straw. The design varied depending on wealth and location, but simplicity was common. Several generations frequently lived together under one roof. Grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives shared responsibilities and resources. Family was considered the most important social unit. Loyalty to one's family often came before loyalty to broader society. Children were expected to respect and obey their parents. Parents, in turn, were responsible for guiding and protecting their children. Ancestors also played a significant role in family life. Many households maintained ancestral tablets or shrines, where family members honored those who had passed away. People believed that ancestors continued to influence the lives of the living. Respecting them was considered both a duty and a source of spiritual protection. The influence of Confucian values. By the Han period, the teachings of Confucius were becoming increasingly influential. Confucianism emphasized order, responsibility, and proper behavior. According to these teachings, society functioned best when everyone fulfilled their obligations. Rulers should govern wisely. Officials should serve honestly. Parents should care for their children. Children should respect their parents. These principles shaped daily life throughout the empire. One of the most important Confucian values was filial piety, the duty to honor and care for one's parents and ancestors. This expectation influenced family relationships, inheritance practices, and social behavior. Confucian ideals did not simply affect politics. They became deeply woven into the culture of Han China. Education and learning. Education was highly valued, though opportunities varied greatly depending on social status. Wealthier families could often hire tutors or send their children to study with scholars. Poorer families frequently lacked such opportunities because children were needed to help with farm work and household responsibilities. Students learned reading, writing, history, and moral teachings. They studied classical texts and memorized important passages. Literacy remained limited compared to modern societies, but education carried tremendous prestige. Knowledge was increasingly viewed as a path to advancement. The Han government gradually expanded the role of educated officials, laying the foundation for future civil service systems. As a result, scholars occupied an important position within society. Their influence would continue to grow in the centuries ahead. The role of women. Women in Han society faced significant restrictions compared to men. Social expectations emphasized obedience, modesty, and devotion to family responsibilities. A woman was generally expected to obey her father before marriage, her husband after marriage, and her sons if she became widowed. Most women managed household affairs, prepared food, cared for children, and contributed to agricultural work. In many rural communities, women worked alongside men in the fields. Despite limitations, women played essential roles in maintaining family stability. Some also gained influence through their relationships with powerful men. Within the imperial court, empresses and royal mothers occasionally exercised considerable political power behind the scenes. Nevertheless, Han society remained largely patriarchal, and opportunities for women were often restricted by tradition. Food and daily meals. The foods people ate depended heavily on location, wealth, and social status. For ordinary families, meals were usually simple. Grains formed the foundation of the diet. Millet, wheat, and rice were commonly consumed. Vegetables, beans, and fruits supplemented daily meals. Meat was less common for ordinary people and was often reserved for special occasions. Wealthier households enjoyed a more varied diet. They could afford pork, beef, chicken, fish, and luxury ingredients transported through trade networks. Food was more than nourishment. Meals often served as opportunities for families to gather, strengthen relationships, and honor traditions. Many customs associated with food reflected broader cultural values, emphasizing harmony and family unity. Markets and commerce. Although agriculture dominated the economy, trade played an increasingly important role in Han society. Markets brought together farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and consumers. People exchanged food, tools, textiles, pottery, and countless other goods. Some merchants traveled long distances, connecting regions that produced different products. Large cities became centers of commercial activity. Busy streets filled with vendors selling everything from everyday necessities to luxury items. The government regulated many aspects of trade, including certain prices and market activities. Despite official suspicion toward merchants, commerce contributed significantly to economic growth. As trade expanded, wealth flowed across the empire, creating new opportunities and strengthening connections between distant communities. Entertainment and leisure. Life in Han China was not entirely devoted to work. People found ways to relax, celebrate, and enjoy themselves. Festivals marked important seasonal events and religious observances. Music accompanied ceremonies, gatherings, and public celebrations. Games provided entertainment for both children and adults. Storytelling remained popular, especially in communities where literacy was limited. Athletic competitions and hunting activities also attracted interest among certain groups. For wealthy families, leisure activities could include poetry, scholarship, music, and artistic pursuits. Although daily life was often demanding, people sought moments of enjoyment and connection whenever possible. These traditions helped strengthen communities and preserve cultural identity. Cities of the Han Empire. While most people lived in rural areas, cities became increasingly important during the Han Dynasty. The capital, Chang'an, was among the largest and most impressive urban centers in the ancient world. Wide streets, government buildings, markets, workshops, and residential districts filled the city. Officials, soldiers, merchants, artisans, and laborers lived and worked within its walls. Other cities throughout the empire also expanded as trade and administration grew. Urban centers served as hubs of culture, politics, and economic activity. They connected different regions and facilitated the movement of goods, ideas, and people. The growth of cities reflected the increasing sophistication of Han civilization. The human foundation of an empire. The Han Dynasty is often remembered for its emperors, military victories, and technological achievements. Yet none of these accomplishments would have been possible without the ordinary people who sustained the empire. Farmers cultivated the fields. Craftsmen produced essential goods. Merchants connected distant regions. Families preserved traditions and values. Their daily efforts created the wealth and stability that allowed the Han state to flourish. Together, they formed the living foundation of one of history's greatest civilizations. And as the empire grew stronger, new ideas would begin to shape its future. Among these ideas, none would prove more influential than the philosophy that sought to bring order, morality, and harmony to society. That philosophy was Confucianism. Chapter 5: The Rise of Confucian China. Empires are not held together by armies alone. Soldiers can conquer territory. Generals can win battles. But lasting stability requires something more powerful, a shared set of values that gives people a sense of order, purpose, and identity. For the Han Dynasty, that foundation became Confucianism. Over time, the teachings of Confucius would shape nearly every aspect of Chinese life. They influenced government policy, education, family relationships, social expectations, and even the way emperors viewed their responsibilities. By the height of the Han Dynasty, Confucian ideas had become deeply woven into the fabric of society. But this transformation did not happen overnight. It was the result of centuries of intellectual debate, political experimentation, and the search for a system capable of bringing stability to a vast empire. To understand the Han Dynasty, we must first understand the man whose ideas would help define it. A philosopher in a time of chaos. Confucius was born in 551 BCE, during one of the most turbulent periods in Chinese history. At the time, the authority of the Zhou kings was weakening, and rival states competed for power. Wars erupted frequently. Political intrigue was common. Many people believed society was losing its moral foundation. Confucius looked at the chaos around him and reached a simple conclusion. The problem was not merely weak armies or poor laws. The problem was that people had forgotten how to behave properly. Rulers pursued personal gain rather than serving the public. Officials abused their positions. Families neglected traditional responsibilities. According to Confucius, restoring order required restoring morality. He spent much of his life teaching students and advising rulers, hoping to create a more harmonious society. Although he never achieved great political power during his lifetime, his ideas would outlive him by more than 2,000 years. The core teachings of Confucius. Unlike many religious founders, Confucius focused primarily on ethics and human relationships. He believed that a stable society depended on people fulfilling their responsibilities toward one another. One of his most important concepts was Ren, often translated as benevolence or humaneness. A person possessing Ren treated others with kindness, respect, and compassion. Confucius argued that true leadership required moral character. A ruler who governed wisely and fairly would inspire loyalty, without relying entirely on force. Another key principle was Li, which referred to proper behavior, customs, rituals, and social conduct. By following established traditions, people could maintain harmony and avoid conflict. Confucius also emphasized honesty, self-discipline, humility, and education. His teachings encouraged individuals to improve themselves continuously, rather than seek personal gain at the expense of others. These ideas may seem simple, but they offered a powerful alternative to the violence and instability that dominated much of ancient China. The importance of family. For Confucius, the family served as the foundation of society. If families functioned properly, the state would also function properly. One of the most important Confucian values was filial piety. This principle required children to respect, obey, and care for their parents. It also emphasized honoring ancestors and preserving family traditions. Confucius believed that people learned responsibility first within the family. A child who respected parents would likely respect teachers, officials, and rulers. In this way, family relationships became a model for broader social order. The influence of filial piety extended throughout Han society. Children were expected to support aging parents. Family loyalty remained a central virtue. Even government officials were judged partly by how they treated their relatives. The family became more than a private institution. It became a cornerstone of political and social stability. Competing philosophies. Although Confucianism would eventually dominate Han China, it was not the only philosophy competing for influence. During the centuries before the Han Dynasty, numerous schools of thought emerged. Among the most important was legalism. Legalist thinkers believed people were naturally selfish and could not be trusted to behave morally on their own. Instead, they argued that order required strong laws, strict punishments, and centralized authority. The Qin dynasty embraced legalism. Its rulers built a powerful state capable of unifying China through military strength and administrative efficiency. However, the harshness of Qin rule generated widespread resentment. When the dynasty collapsed, many leaders began searching for alternatives. Taoism offered another perspective. Associated with figures such as Laozi, Taoism emphasized harmony with nature and the importance of avoiding excessive government interference. Rather than imposing rigid control, Taoists encouraged people to follow the natural flow of life. Each philosophy offered different solutions to the challenges facing society. The Han rulers would ultimately combine elements from several traditions, but Confucianism gradually became the dominant moral framework. Why Han emperors embraced Confucianism? The founders of the Han Dynasty inherited a difficult situation. They needed a philosophy capable of legitimizing imperial authority while promoting social stability. Confucianism provided exactly that. Its emphasis on hierarchy and duty supported political order. Its moral teachings encouraged responsible behavior. Its focus on education helped create competent administrators. Most importantly, Confucianism presented rulers as moral leaders rather than mere conquerors. According to Confucian thought, the emperor should govern through virtue. If he acted wisely and cared for the people, society would prosper. This vision appealed strongly to Han rulers seeking long-term stability. At first, Confucian influence grew gradually. The government continued to use many practical administrative techniques inherited from the Qin dynasty. But over time, Confucian ideas became increasingly important within the imperial court. The process reached a turning point during the reign of one of the Han Dynasty's greatest rulers, Emperor Wu and the Confucian state. When Emperor Wu of Han came to power in 141 BCE, the Han Empire was growing stronger and more confident. Emperor Wu sought to expand both the empire's territory and its intellectual foundations. Under his rule, Confucianism received unprecedented support. Confucian scholars gained influence at court. Government officials increasingly relied on Confucian principles when advising the emperor. Educational institutions dedicated to Confucian learning were established. Students studied classical texts and prepared for careers in government service. Although other philosophies continued to exist, Confucianism now enjoyed official endorsement. The state was effectively declaring that moral education and ethical leadership were essential components of good government. This decision would shape Chinese civilization for centuries. Education as a path to success. One of the most important consequences of Confucian influence was the growing emphasis on education. Confucius believed knowledge and moral development should be cultivated through study. Han rulers embraced this idea. Scholarship became increasingly respected throughout society. Families often viewed education as a path to prestige and opportunity. Students spent years mastering classical texts, memorizing passages, and studying history, ethics, and government. Although formal civil service examinations would become more important in later dynasties, the Han period laid much of the groundwork. Officials were increasingly selected based on learning and character, rather than solely on noble birth. This represented a significant shift in Chinese society. Knowledge became a valuable form of power. The scholar officials. As Confucianism spread, a new elite emerged. These were the scholar officials. Unlike military commanders or hereditary nobles, scholar officials derived their status from education and administrative ability. They served as advisors, judges, tax collectors, and administrators throughout the empire. Their responsibilities were immense. They implemented government policies, resolved disputes, maintained records, and communicated with local communities. Confucian ideals shaped their professional identity. Officials were expected to act honestly, serve the public, and place duty above personal gain. Reality did not always match these ideals. Corruption occasionally appeared, as it does in many governments. Yet the expectation of ethical service remained an important part of the political culture. The scholar official would become one of the defining figures of Chinese history. Confucianism in everyday life. The influence of Confucianism extended far beyond government offices. Its values shaped daily interactions throughout Han society. People were encouraged to respect elders. Teachers enjoyed high social status. Family obligations remained central to personal identity. Ceremonies and rituals reinforced social relationships. Proper behavior was considered a reflection of moral character. Even language reflected Confucian values, with forms of address emphasizing respect and hierarchy. These customs helped create a shared cultural framework across the empire. Regardless of whether someone lived in a major city or a remote farming village, Confucian principles influenced how they viewed themselves and others. The philosophy became a unifying force within a vast and diverse population. The limits of Confucian ideals. Despite its influence, Confucianism was not a perfect solution to every problem. Human societies are complex, and moral teachings alone cannot eliminate conflict or corruption. Some critics argued that Confucian ideals placed too much emphasis on hierarchy and obedience. Others believed the philosophy favored educated elites over ordinary people. Even within the Han government, Officials sometimes failed to live up to the values they promoted. Power struggles, corruption, and political rivalries continued to occur. Yet despite these limitations, Confucianism proved remarkably resilient. Its ability to provide ethical guidance, support political legitimacy, and promote social stability made it attractive to generations of rulers. For centuries, it would remain one of the most influential intellectual traditions in East Asia. The philosophy that shaped an empire. The Han Dynasty transformed Confucianism from the teachings of a philosopher into the guiding ideology of a civilization. Its influence reached into government, education, family life, and culture. The values promoted by Confucius helped create a sense of order within a vast empire. They encouraged learning, emphasized responsibility, and reinforced the importance of moral leadership. While armies defended the borders and officials managed the provinces, Confucian ideas provided the intellectual framework that held much of society together. The Han Empire would continue to expand, becoming wealthier and more powerful with each generation. And as its influence spread beyond China's borders, so too would the ideas that had helped shape it. Soon, trade routes stretching thousands of miles would connect China to distant civilizations, carrying not only goods but also cultures, technologies, and beliefs. These routes would become known as the Silk Road. Chapter 6: Emperor Wu and the Expansion of the Han Empire. Every great empire reaches a moment when it must decide what kind of power it wants to become. Will it remain focused on defending its borders? Or will it seek to expand its influence beyond them? For the Han Dynasty, that moment arrived during the reign of Emperor Wu of Han. When Emperor Wu ascended the throne in 141 BCE, the Han Empire was already stable and prosperous. Decades of careful governance had rebuilt the country after the chaos that followed the fall of the Qin dynasty. But Emperor Wu was not content with merely preserving what his predecessors had created. He envisioned something greater. He wanted a stronger military, a larger empire, greater influence over neighboring peoples, and a China that stood as the dominant power in East Asia. Over the next 54 years, Emperor Wu would transform the Han Dynasty into one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. His reign became a turning point in Chinese history. Yet achieving such greatness would come at a cost. A young emperor with big ambitions. Emperor Wu became ruler at a relatively young age. At first, experienced officials and advisors helped guide government affairs. But as he matured, he began taking a more active role in shaping policy. Unlike some earlier rulers who prioritized caution and stability, Emperor Wu possessed enormous ambition. He believed the Han Empire should project strength both at home and abroad. The emperor admired capable military leaders and valued decisive action. He invested heavily in government institutions, military reforms, and expansionist policies. His confidence reflected the growing strength of the Han state. The empire's population was increasing. Agriculture was thriving. Government revenues were rising. For the first time in generations, China possessed both the resources and stability necessary to pursue larger goals. Emperor Wu intended to take full advantage of this opportunity. The threat from the north. One challenge dominated Han foreign policy more than any other. The Xiongnu. The Xiongnu Confederation were a powerful confederation of nomadic peoples who lived north of China's borders. Highly skilled horsemen, they controlled vast stretches of steppe territory. For decades, they had posed a serious threat to Chinese security. Mounted warriors could move quickly across great distances, launching raids before defenders had time to respond. Entire communities near the frontier lived under constant fear of attack. Earlier Han rulers had often relied on diplomacy to maintain peace. Some even arranged marriages between Chinese princesses and Xiongnu leaders as part of political agreements. These policies reduced conflict temporarily, but failed to eliminate the threat. Emperor Wu grew increasingly frustrated with this situation. He believed the Han Empire should not simply react to attacks. It should take the initiative. Preparing for war. Confronting the Xiongnu required significant preparation. The Han military needed stronger leadership, better logistics, and greater resources. Emperor Wu invested heavily in all three. New horses were acquired. Weapons production increased. Supply systems improved. The government devoted enormous resources to supporting military operations along the frontier. Talented generals rose through the ranks. Among the most famous were Wei Qing and Hu Quibang. Both men would become legendary for their campaigns against the Xiongnu. The stage was set for one of the most important military struggles of the ancient world. The great campaigns against the Xiongnu. The wars between the Han Empire and the Xiongnu lasted for decades. These were not small border skirmishes. They involved massive armies operating across harsh and unforgiving terrain. Han forces launched deep offensives into steppe territory. Generals led cavalry, units hundreds of miles beyond traditional frontiers. Battles were often decided by speed, endurance, and logistical planning as much as by direct combat. Wei Qing achieved several important victories that weakened Xiongnu power. Meanwhile, Hu Quibang gained fame for daring campaigns that carried Han forces deep into enemy territory. His rapid movements caught opponents by surprise and demonstrated the growing effectiveness of the Han military. Although the conflict remained costly, the balance of power gradually shifted. The Xiongnu threat diminished. For the first time, the Han Empire gained the upper hand. Expanding the empire. Military success encouraged further expansion. Under Emperor Wu, Han influence spread in multiple directions. To the south, imperial forces incorporated new territories into the empire. Regions corresponding to parts of modern southern China came increasingly under Han control. To the northeast, military campaigns extended Chinese influence into areas near the Korean peninsula. To the west, the emperor became interested in lands far beyond traditional Chinese frontiers. These western regions offered strategic opportunities and access to valuable trade routes. Expansion was not always easy. Many newly acquired territories contained diverse populations with different languages, customs, and traditions. Managing such regions required both military strength and effective administration. Nevertheless, the empire continued to grow. By the height of Emperor Wu's reign, Han China controlled more territory than ever before. The mission of Zhang Qian, one of Emperor Wu's most important decisions, involved exploration rather than warfare. The emperor wanted allies against the Xiongnu. To find them, he sent an envoy named Zhang Qian westward into unfamiliar lands. The mission was extraordinarily dangerous. Zhang Qian was captured by the Xiongnu and spent years in captivity. Yet he eventually escaped and continued his journey. As he traveled across Central Asia, he encountered peoples, cultures, and kingdoms previously unknown to most Chinese officials. Although he failed to secure the alliance Emperor Wu originally sought, his reports transformed Chinese understanding of the wider world. For the first time, the Han court possessed detailed information about distant regions far beyond China's borders. These discoveries would have enormous consequences. Opening the road to the west, Zhang Qian's journeys revealed something remarkable. Beyond the deserts and mountains of Central Asia, existed thriving civilizations connected by networks of trade. Merchants exchanged goods across vast distances. Ideas traveled alongside products. Opportunities for economic and diplomatic expansion were everywhere. Inspired by this knowledge, the Han government increased its involvement in Western regions. Trade routes gradually developed between China and distant lands. These routes would later become known collectively as the Silk Road. Although the Silk Road was not a single road, it connected numerous pathways stretching across Asia. Through these routes, Chinese silk reached foreign markets, while new products and ideas entered China. The impact of these exchanges would shape world history. Strengthening imperial authority. Expansion required more than military victories. The empire also needed stronger administrative systems. As territory increased, so did the challenges of governance. Emperor Wu expanded the bureaucracy and strengthened central authority. Officials monitored provinces more closely. Tax collection became more efficient. Government oversight increased throughout the empire. The emperor also worked to limit the power of regional nobles who might threaten central control. These measures enhanced imperial authority, but sometimes generated resentment among local elites. Maintaining unity across a vast empire was never simple. Yet Emperor Wu believed strong centralized leadership was essential for long-term stability. His policies reflected that conviction. The cost of greatness. Despite his achievements, Emperor Wu's reign was not without problems. Military campaigns required enormous resources. Wars consumed vast amounts of money, food, and manpower. Taxes increased to support government spending. Some communities struggled under the burden. Long campaigns also resulted in significant casualties. Thousands of soldiers died fighting on distant frontiers. Critics argued that expansion came at too high a price. Even successful wars could strain the economy and create hardship for ordinary people. Toward the end of his reign, Emperor Wu reportedly reflected on some of these challenges. He acknowledged mistakes and sought to reduce certain burdens on the population. His legacy, therefore, remains complex. He was both a conqueror and a builder, a visionary ruler whose ambitions brought both glory and sacrifice. A golden age of Han power. When Emperor Wu died in 87 BCE, the Han Dynasty was stronger than it had ever been. Its territory had expanded dramatically. Its military commanded respect. Its influence reached far beyond traditional borders. The empire now stood at the center of an increasingly interconnected world. Many historians regard Emperor Wu's reign as one of the high points of Chinese history. His policies transformed the Han Dynasty from a regional power into a major empire. Yet his achievements extended beyond conquest. The exploration of Western regions and the growth of long-distance trade would open new possibilities for future generations. China was no longer isolated. It was becoming part of a vast network connecting civilizations across Asia. And through these connections, goods, technologies, religions, and ideas would begin flowing in ways that would change the ancient world forever. The story of that transformation begins with the Silk Road. Chapter 7: The Silk Road Revolution. For most of human history, civilizations developed largely in isolation. Mountains, deserts, oceans, and vast distances separated peoples from one another. News traveled slowly. Goods rarely moved far from where they were produced. Entire societies could exist for centuries with little knowledge of distant lands. But during the Han Dynasty, something remarkable began to happen. A network of trade routes gradually connected China to Central Asia, the Middle East, and eventually even the edges of Europe. Merchants, diplomats, travelers, and explorers began moving across thousands of miles of difficult terrain. Along with valuable goods came ideas, technologies, religions, and cultural influences. The world was becoming more connected. At the center of this transformation stood a trading network that historians would later call the Silk Road. Its impact extended far beyond commerce. It reshaped economies, influenced cultures, and linked civilizations that had once seemed impossibly distant. For the Han Dynasty, the Silk Road became one of the greatest achievements of the age. A journey into the unknown. The origins of the Silk Road can be traced back to the ambitions of Emperor Wu of Han. As threats from the Xiongnu continued to challenge the empire, Emperor Wu searched for potential allies in lands far to the west. To accomplish this goal, he dispatched a diplomat named Zhang Qian. What followed became one of the most important journeys in Chinese history. Zhang Qian traveled beyond territories familiar to the Han court. His mission was dangerous from the beginning. Not long after departing, he was captured by the Xiongnu and held for years. Many would have abandoned the mission. Zhang Qian did not. Eventually escaping captivity, he continued westward, crossing mountains, deserts, and unfamiliar kingdoms. Along the way, he encountered cultures unlike anything most Chinese officials had ever known. Although he failed to secure the military alliance he originally sought, his reports opened China's eyes to a much larger world. The information he brought home would change history. Discovering the western regions. When Zhang Qian returned to China, he described prosperous kingdoms, thriving cities, and extensive trade networks stretching across Central Asia. His reports fascinated the Han court. Many officials had assumed that China existed at the center of civilization. Now they learned of other powerful societies beyond the western deserts. Some regions possessed superior horses. Others produced valuable metals, precious stones, and luxury goods. The opportunities appeared enormous. The Han government quickly recognized that these western lands offered more than potential military allies. They offered access to trade. And trade meant wealth. Interest in the western regions grew rapidly. Diplomatic missions increased. Merchants followed. Gradually, routes linking China with distant territories began to develop. What started as exploration evolved into something much larger. The birth of the Silk Road. Contrary to popular imagination, the Silk Road was not a single road. It was a vast network of interconnected routes crossing deserts, mountains, grasslands, and valleys. Different paths connected different regions. Some routes passed through the harsh landscapes of Central Asia. Others wound through mountain passes or skirted dangerous deserts. Travel was slow and difficult. Yet the potential rewards were tremendous. Merchants carried valuable goods from one trading center to another. Few individuals traveled the entire distance from China to the westernmost regions. Instead, products moved through a chain of exchanges. A merchant might transport goods to one city, where another trader would carry them farther west. Over time, this system created an economic network spanning thousands of miles. The Silk Road had begun. Why silk was so valuable? Among all the goods traded along these routes, none became more famous than silk. Chinese artisans had mastered silk production centuries earlier. The process required raising silkworms, harvesting their cocoons, and carefully weaving delicate threads into fabric. The result was extraordinary. Silk was lightweight, strong, smooth, and visually striking. Foreign merchants viewed it as a luxury unlike anything they had seen before. Demand for Chinese silk grew rapidly across Asia and beyond. Kings, nobles, and wealthy elites prized silk as a symbol of status and wealth. In some regions, silk became so valuable that it functioned almost like currency. Because of its importance, the trading network eventually became known as the Silk Road. Yet silk represented only one part of a much larger exchange. Goods flowing across continents. The Silk Road facilitated the movement of countless products. China exported silk, lacquerware, iron tools, paper, and other manufactured goods. In return, merchants brought new products into the Han Empire. Among the most important imports were horses from Central Asia. These animals were larger and stronger than many horses available within China. Han military leaders highly valued them for cavalry operations. Other imported goods included precious stones, gold and silver, glassware, textiles, exotic animals, spices, new agricultural products. Each exchange introduced people to unfamiliar materials and technologies. Markets became increasingly diverse. The world was growing smaller, one trade route at a time. The dangerous life of a merchant. Although trade offered opportunities for wealth, it was rarely easy. Merchants faced extraordinary dangers. Travelers crossing Central Asia encountered some of the harshest environments on Earth. The vast Taklamakan Desert presented extreme heat during the day and freezing temperatures at night. Water sources were scarce. A wrong turn could prove fatal. Mountain routes posed additional risks. Avalanches, landslides, and severe weather threatened caravans attempting to cross high passes. Bandits represented another constant danger. Valuable cargo attracted criminals eager to seize goods through force. To improve their chances of survival, merchants often traveled in large groups known as caravans. Camels became essential companions. Their ability to carry heavy loads and endure harsh conditions made long-distance trade possible. Every successful journey required courage, planning, and perseverance. Cities that thrived on trade. As commerce expanded, numerous cities prospered along the Silk Road. These urban centers served as resting points, marketplaces, and cultural crossroads. Merchants from different regions gathered to exchange goods and information. Languages mixed. Customs blended. Ideas spread. One important hub was Dunhuang, located near the western edge of Chinese territory. Travelers passing through often paused to rest, resupply, and prepare for the next stage of their journey. Farther west, numerous oasis cities flourished by supporting trade caravans. Without these settlements, long-distance commerce would have been nearly impossible. The prosperity generated by trade transformed local economies and helped create vibrant multicultural communities. The exchange of ideas. The Silk Road carried far more than physical goods. It also transported knowledge. Ideas moved alongside merchants and travelers. New technologies spread from one civilization to another. Scientific discoveries, artistic styles, and cultural practices crossed vast distances. Perhaps most importantly, religions traveled along these routes. One of the most significant examples was Buddhism. Originating in India, Buddhist teachings gradually spread across Central Asia before reaching China. Merchants, monks, and travelers played important roles in this process. Over time, Buddhism would become one of the most influential religious traditions in Chinese history. The Silk Road acted as a bridge connecting not only economies, but also belief systems. Its cultural impact proved as important as its economic significance. Han China and the wider world. Through the Silk Road, the Han Dynasty became increasingly aware of distant civilizations. Chinese officials learned of powerful kingdoms far beyond their borders. Meanwhile, foreign peoples gained knowledge about China. Although direct contact between the Han Empire and distant Western civilizations remained limited, awareness grew on both sides. Some historians believe Chinese silk eventually reached the territories of the Roman Empire. Likewise, Roman goods may have found their way east through intermediary traders. Whether or not individuals from these empires met face to face, their economies became indirectly connected. For one of the first times in history, major civilizations were participating in an international network of exchange. The consequences would be profound. A new era of connectivity. The Silk Road transformed the Han Dynasty. Trade generated wealth. Foreign goods enriched markets. New ideas expanded intellectual horizons. Diplomatic contacts increased China's understanding of the wider world. The empire was no longer focused solely on its immediate neighbors. It had become part of a broader international system stretching across Asia. This transformation helped fuel economic growth and cultural development throughout the Han period. The benefits would continue for centuries. Yet commerce and trade were only part of the Han achievement. The same civilization that built these international connections also produced remarkable advances in science, engineering, medicine, and technology. Many of these innovations would influence human history long after the Han Dynasty itself had disappeared. The next chapter explores the inventions and discoveries that helped make Han China one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. Chapter 8: Science, Technology, and Innovation. When people think of the ancient world, they often imagine civilizations limited by primitive technology. They picture societies struggling with basic tools and simple methods of survival. Yet the Han Dynasty tells a very different story. Across the empire, scholars, engineers, craftsmen, and inventors pushed the boundaries of what was possible. They studied the heavens. They developed new technologies. They improved agriculture, transportation, manufacturing, and communication. Many of their achievements were centuries ahead of their time. Some innovations would spread across continents and influence the course of world history. Others would remain uniquely Chinese for generations. Together, these discoveries helped transform the Han Dynasty into one of the most technologically advanced civilizations of the ancient world. While armies expanded the empire and merchants carried goods across the Silk Road, innovation quietly reshaped everyday life. The Han era became an age of invention, a culture that valued knowledge. The Han Dynasty inherited a strong intellectual tradition from earlier periods of Chinese history. Confucian scholars emphasized education and learning. Government officials carefully recorded information about agriculture, economics, astronomy, and administration. This culture of observation encouraged practical problem-solving. Many innovations emerged not from isolated experiments, but from efforts to improve daily life. Farmers sought better tools. Officials wanted more accurate records. Military leaders demanded improved equipment. Engineers looked for more efficient ways to transport goods. The result was a steady stream of technological progress. Unlike some civilizations where knowledge remained confined to small groups, Han China actively integrated useful discoveries into government and society. Innovation became part of the empire's growth. The invention of paper. Perhaps no Han invention had a greater impact on human history than paper. Before paper became widely available, writing materials were often expensive and difficult to produce. Documents might be written on bamboo strips, wooden tablets, silk, or other materials. These options had significant disadvantages. Bamboo was heavy. Wood required large amounts of material. Silk was costly. The need for something better became increasingly obvious. Around 105 CE, an official named Kai Lun improved existing papermaking techniques. Using materials such as bark, hemp, rags, and fishing nets, he helped develop a process that produced a lightweight and relatively inexpensive writing surface. The advantages were enormous. Paper was easier to transport. It required fewer resources than silk. It made record-keeping more efficient. Government administration benefited immediately. Over time, paper would revolutionize communication, education, literature, and scholarship throughout the world. Few inventions have had such lasting influence. Recording and preserving knowledge. The spread of paper allowed knowledge to be preserved more effectively than ever before. Government records expanded. Scholars copied important texts. Historical documents survived in greater numbers. Libraries grew. Education became more accessible to those who could obtain written materials. The Han government relied heavily on documentation. Officials recorded taxes, population figures, agricultural production, legal decisions, and military information. Without reliable written records, managing a vast empire would have been nearly impossible. Paper made this task far easier. It strengthened both administration and intellectual life. The ability to store information efficiently became one of the foundations of Han success. Advances in agriculture. Agriculture remained the backbone of the Han economy. Any improvement in farming techniques could have enormous consequences for millions of people. Han farmers benefited from numerous innovations. Iron tools became increasingly common. Compared to earlier equipment, iron plows and agricultural implements were stronger and more effective. Farmers could cultivate larger areas of land with less effort. Irrigation systems also improved. Canals, reservoirs, and water management projects helped increase agricultural productivity. Government officials often supported these efforts because food production directly affected political stability. New techniques allowed farmers to produce more reliable harvests. As agricultural output increased, populations grew. This surplus food supported cities, trade networks, and government institutions. In many ways, agricultural innovation provided the foundation for all other economic growth. Engineering and infrastructure. The Han Dynasty invested heavily in infrastructure. Roads connected distant provinces. Bridges improved transportation. Canals facilitated the movement of goods and people. These projects required impressive engineering skills. Maintaining communication across a vast empire posed constant challenges. Officials needed ways to move information quickly. Merchants required reliable transportation routes. Armies depended on supply networks. Infrastructure addressed all of these needs. The government organized large construction efforts that improved efficiency throughout the empire. These investments strengthened both economic and political unity. A connected empire was easier to govern and defend. Understanding the heavens. Astronomy occupied an important place in Han society. Ancient Chinese rulers believed heavenly events reflected conditions on Earth. Astronomers carefully observed the sky, searching for patterns and signs. They tracked the movements of stars, planets, and the sun. Calendars became increasingly sophisticated. Accurate calendars helped farmers determine planting seasons and allowed officials to organize administrative activities. Astronomical observations also carried political significance. Many people believed unusual celestial events could indicate changes in heaven's favor toward the ruling dynasty. As a result, astronomical research received considerable support. Han scholars developed increasingly detailed knowledge of the cosmos. Their observations contributed to one of the world's oldest continuous traditions of astronomical study. Zhang Heng and the seismograph. One of the most remarkable inventors of the Han period was Zhang Heng. A scholar, astronomer, engineer, and mathematician, Zhang Heng made important contributions across multiple fields. His most famous invention was an early seismograph. Earthquakes posed serious threats throughout China. Officials often struggled to determine where disasters had occurred, especially when affected regions were far from the capital. Zhang Heng designed a device capable of detecting distant seismic activity. The instrument reportedly indicated the direction from which earthquake vibrations originated. For its time, the achievement was extraordinary. It demonstrated both scientific creativity and practical problem-solving. Although primitive by modern standards, it represented one of humanity's earliest known earthquake detection devices. Medicine and healing. Medical knowledge advanced significantly during the Han Dynasty. Physicians studied the human body, disease, and treatment methods. Traditional Chinese medicine continued to develop during this period. Doctors observed symptoms carefully and sought patterns that might explain illness. Herbal remedies played an important role in treatment. Practitioners experimented with various plants and natural substances. Medical texts compiled observations and recommendations for future generations. One influential physician was Zhang Zhongjing. His writings helped establish foundation for later medical practice in China. Although ancient medicine lacked modern scientific methods, Han physicians demonstrated remarkable dedication to understanding health and disease. Their work influenced medical traditions for centuries. Innovations in manufacturing. Han craftsmen achieved impressive advances in manufacturing. Iron production expanded significantly. Metalworkers created tools, weapons, and equipment of increasingly high quality. Government workshops often supervised large-scale production. Silk manufacturing continued to improve. Chinese artisans refined techniques that made their products highly sought after across Asia. Pottery and ceramics also reached new levels of sophistication. Skilled craftsmen produced both practical household items and decorative works of art. These industries supported trade and generated wealth throughout the empire. The combination of technical skill and organized production contributed to China's economic strength. Military technology. Innovation also played a crucial role in warfare. The Han military benefited from improvements in weapons, armor, and logistics. One particularly important technology was the crossbow. Unlike traditional bows, crossbows could be used effectively with less training. They delivered powerful shots and improved battlefield effectiveness. Standardized manufacturing allowed weapons to be produced more consistently. Military engineers developed equipment for fortifications, transportation, and siege operations. Advances in organization and logistics enabled armies to operate across vast distances. These innovations helped support the military campaigns that expanded and defended the empire. Technology became a force multiplier for Han power. An empire of inventors. The Han Dynasty was far more than a military or political success. It was a civilization driven by curiosity, creativity, and practical innovation. Inventors improved communication through paper. Engineers built roads and canals. Astronomers studied the heavens. Physicians sought better treatments for illness. Scientists such as Zhang Heng pushed the limits of contemporary knowledge. Many of these achievements would outlast the dynasty itself. Their influence spread across generations and eventually across continents. The Han Empire demonstrated that technological progress could strengthen every aspect of society, from agriculture and trade to government and defense. Yet innovation alone does not create prosperity. To fully understand the success of the Han Dynasty, we must also examine the economy that supported it. The next chapter explores the wealth, commerce, cities, and trade networks that transformed Han China into one of the richest and most dynamic civilizations of the ancient world. Chapter 9: Wealth, Cities, and Commerce. An empire can possess powerful armies, brilliant scholars, and impressive technology. But none of these things can exist without a strong economy. The Han Dynasty understood this better than most. Behind every military campaign stood farmers producing food. Behind every government project stood workers and merchants generating wealth. Behind every technological breakthrough stood a society capable of supporting innovation. By the height of the Han era, China had become one of the wealthiest and most economically advanced civilizations in the ancient world. Its markets bustled with activity. Its cities expanded rapidly. Trade connected distant regions. Goods flowed across thousands of miles, both within the empire and beyond its borders. The economic transformation of Han China helped create a level of prosperity that impressed visitors and strengthened the dynasty for generations. Yet this prosperity did not appear overnight. It was built through careful administration, agricultural productivity, expanding trade, and the hard work of millions of ordinary people. The economic foundations of the empire. At the heart of the Han economy stood agriculture. No matter how sophisticated trade became, farming remained the foundation of national wealth. Most people lived in rural communities and worked the land. Fields of millet, wheat, rice, and other crops stretched across the empire. Every successful harvest supported countless activities beyond the countryside. Farmers produced the food that fed soldiers, government officials, artisans, and city populations. They also paid taxes that funded public works and imperial administration. A poor harvest could threaten the stability of entire regions. A good harvest could stimulate economic growth throughout the empire. Because agriculture was so important, Han rulers invested heavily in irrigation projects, flood control systems, and agricultural improvements. The prosperity of the empire began in the fields. Population growth and economic expansion. As political stability increased, the population of the Han Empire grew significantly. Peace encouraged farming. Improved agricultural techniques boosted food production. Communities expanded. Families grew larger. With more people came greater economic activity. More workers cultivated fields. More artisans produced goods. More consumers purchased products in local markets. Population growth created new opportunities, but also new challenges. The government needed to manage resources carefully and maintain social stability. Fortunately, the expanding economy helped provide the means to meet these demands. The Han Empire became one of the most populous states in the ancient world. Its growing population fueled both production and consumption. The rise of markets. Throughout Han China, markets served as the center of economic life. Villagers gathered to exchange goods. Merchants transported products between regions. Artisans sold tools, clothing, pottery, and countless other items. Marketplaces could be lively and crowded. Farmers arrived with surplus crops. Craftsmen displayed their work. Traders negotiated prices and arranged shipments. Customers searched for goods they could not produce themselves. Markets connected producers with consumers and helped spread wealth throughout society. Even small communities often maintained regular market days. Larger towns developed permanent commercial districts. As trade expanded, markets became increasingly important to everyday life. Merchants and their growing influence. Despite their importance to the economy, merchants occupied a complicated position within Han society. Confucian scholars often viewed them with suspicion. Many believed merchants profited from the labor of others without producing essential goods themselves. As a result, merchants generally ranked below farmers in traditional social hierarchies. Yet reality told a different story. Successful traders could become extremely wealthy. Some controlled large commercial operations spanning multiple regions. Others specialized in transporting valuable goods over long distances. Their activities helped connect different parts of the empire. Merchants moved food from surplus regions to areas experiencing shortages. They distributed manufactured products and introduced new goods to local markets. Although officials sometimes attempted to limit their influence, commerce continued to expand. Economic success often proved difficult to restrain. Government control of key industries. The Han government recognized that certain industries were too important to leave entirely in private hands. As a result, the state exercised significant control over strategic resources. Among the most notable examples were salt and iron. Salt was essential for preserving food and maintaining health. Iron was critical for producing tools, weapons, and agricultural equipment. Because these industries generated substantial profits, the government established monopolies over their production and distribution during parts of the Han period. Officials believed state control could increase revenue and strengthen national security. Not everyone agreed. Debates emerged regarding the proper balance between government regulation and private enterprise. These discussions reflected broader questions about economics and governance that continue to resonate today. Regardless of the outcome, the state's involvement demonstrated the importance of these industries to the empire's prosperity. Coinage and money. Economic growth required reliable methods of exchange. Barter alone could not support a large and complex economy. The Han Dynasty benefited from a standardized currency system inherited from earlier reforms. Coins circulated widely throughout the empire. Merchants used them to purchase goods. Taxes could be collected more efficiently. Trade became easier because buyers and sellers shared a common medium of exchange. The widespread use of money encouraged commercial activity and helped integrate regional economies. A farmer in one province could sell crops and use the proceeds to purchase products made hundreds of miles away. This level of economic connectivity strengthened the empire as a whole. The growth of great cities. As commerce expanded, cities became increasingly important. Urban centers served as hubs of trade, administration, and culture. Among the most impressive was Chang'an. As the imperial capital, Chang'an attracted officials, scholars, merchants, artisans, and laborers from across the empire. Wide streets connected bustling districts. Markets offered products from distant regions. Government buildings reflected the authority of the Han state. The city became one of the largest urban centers in the ancient world. Other cities also flourished. Regional capitals developed thriving commercial sectors. Workshops produced goods for local consumption and long-distance trade. The growth of cities reflected the increasing sophistication of Han civilization. Urban life offered opportunities unavailable in rural areas and helped drive economic innovation. Workshops and manufacturing. Economic prosperity depended not only on agriculture, but also on manufacturing. Across the empire, artisans produced a remarkable variety of goods. Blacksmiths forged tools and weapons. Potters created household items and decorative works. Woodworkers crafted furniture and construction materials. Silk producers manufactured some of the most valuable products in the ancient world. Many workshops operated on a relatively small scale. Others employed large numbers of workers. Government-run facilities sometimes produced goods for official use, while private enterprises supplied growing markets. The quality of hand craftsmanship became widely respected. Chinese products were sought after both within the empire and beyond its borders. Manufacturing transformed raw materials into wealth and helped fuel commercial growth. Long-distance trade. Not all trade occurred within China. The Han Dynasty participated in extensive international commerce. The development of the Silk Road created new opportunities for economic expansion. Merchants carried Chinese goods westward while bringing foreign products into the empire. Silk remained one of the most valuable exports. Foreign demand was enormous. Other exported goods included iron products, lacquerware, and fine textiles. Imports introduced Chinese consumers to unfamiliar products from distant lands. Trade generated wealth for merchants, increased government revenue, and strengthened diplomatic connections. It also exposed people to new cultures and ideas. Economic exchange became a bridge linking civilizations across Asia. Wealth and social chain. As commerce expanded, wealth became more concentrated in certain segments of society. Large landowners accumulated extensive estates. Successful merchants grew increasingly prosperous. Urban elites enjoyed lifestyles unavailable to most ordinary citizens. At the same time, many rural families continued to struggle. Crop failures, debt, and taxation could create hardship. Economic inequality became a recurring concern. Some officials worried that excessive concentrations of wealth might weaken social stability. Various reforms attempted to address these issues, though success was often limited. The tension between prosperity and inequality remained an important challenge throughout Han history. Economic growth brought opportunities, but it did not benefit everyone equally. The prosperity of the Han world. By its peak, the Han Dynasty presided over one of the largest and most prosperous economies of the ancient world. Agriculture produced abundant food. Markets connected communities. Cities expanded. Manufacturing flourished. Trade routes linked China to distant civilizations. This prosperity strengthened the empire and supported its cultural achievements. It funded infrastructure projects, government administration, military campaigns, and technological innovation. For many people, the Han era represented a time of opportunity and economic growth. Yet material wealth was only one aspect of Han civilization. Beyond trade and commerce, the people of the empire also developed rich cultural traditions, artistic achievement. Chapter 9. Wealth, Cities, and Commerce. An empire can possess powerful armies, brilliant scholars, and impressive technology. But none of these things can exist without a strong economy. The Han Dynasty understood this better than most. Chapter 10. Religion, Culture, and Art. An empire is remembered not only for its armies and wealth, but also for its culture. Long after battles are forgotten and rulers pass into history, art, literature, beliefs, and traditions continue to shape the identity of a civilization. The Han Dynasty was no exception. While farmers worked the fields and merchants traveled the Silk Road, scholars wrote histories, artists created masterpieces, and religious traditions evolved throughout the empire. The Han era became a period of remarkable cultural development. Old customs were preserved. New ideas arrived from distant lands. Religious beliefs influenced daily life. Literature flourished. Art reflected both earthly achievements and hopes for the afterlife. Together, these cultural traditions helped define what it meant to be Chinese. Many of the values and practices established during the Han Dynasty would endure for centuries. In some cases, they continue to influence society even today. A world filled with spirits and ancestors. Religion in Han China was not centered around a single faith. Instead, people followed a mixture of beliefs, rituals, and traditions that had developed over generations. One of the most important aspects of spiritual life was ancestor worship. Families believed that deceased relatives continued to exist in another realm. These ancestors could influence the fortunes of the living. If honored properly, they might provide protection and guidance. If neglected, they could become displeased. Many households maintained ancestral shrines. Families offered food, incense, and prayers to honor those who had come before them. These practices strengthened family bonds and reinforced the Confucian emphasis on respect for elders. Ancestor worship became one of the most enduring traditions in Chinese history. Heaven and the mandate to rule. The concept of heaven occupied a central place in Han political and religious thought. Ancient Chinese beliefs held that heaven represented a powerful cosmic force governing the universe. The emperor was viewed as the son of heaven. His authority depended on the mandate of heaven, the belief that heaven granted legitimacy to just rulers. Natural disasters, famines, floods, and rebellions were often interpreted as signs that heaven might be dissatisfied with the government. As a result, emperors paid close attention to unusual events. Astronomers observed the skies. Officials reported natural phenomena. Rulers performed ceremonies designed to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. This connection between political authority and cosmic order became a defining feature of Chinese civilization. The growing influence of Taoism. Alongside traditional beliefs and Confucian values, Taoism continued to grow during the Han period. Associated with Laozi, Taoism emphasized harmony with nature and the importance of following the Tao, often translated as the Way. Taoist thinkers encouraged simplicity. They argued that excessive ambition and interference often created unnecessary problems. Rather than forcing events, people should seek balance and adapt to natural rhythms. Many individuals found comfort in Taoist teachings. Its emphasis on personal harmony offered an alternative to the strict social responsibilities promoted by Confucianism. Over time, Taoism developed religious traditions, rituals, and practices that attracted growing numbers of followers. The philosophy became an important part of China's spiritual landscape. The arrival of Buddhism. One of the most significant cultural developments of the late Han period came from beyond China's borders. Along the Silk Road, merchants and travelers carried more than goods. They also carried ideas. Among these ideas was Buddhism. Originating in ancient India and based on the teachings of Gautama Buddha, Buddhism gradually entered China through trade routes connecting East and South Asia. At first, Buddhism remained unfamiliar to most Chinese people. Its concepts differed from traditional beliefs. Its scriptures originated in foreign languages. Yet some individuals found its teachings appealing. Buddhism offered explanations for suffering, guidance for spiritual development, and the promise of enlightenment. Although it would take centuries for Buddhism to become deeply established in China, the Han period marked the beginning of this transformative process. A new religious tradition had arrived. Literature and the power of the written word. The invention and spread of paper contributed to a flourishing literary culture. Scholars recorded history, composed essays, and preserved important texts. Literature became one of the primary ways knowledge passed from one generation to the next. One of the most important figures of the Han era was Sima Qian. His masterpiece, The The Records of the Grand Historian, remains one of the greatest historical works ever written. Rather than simply listing events, Sima Qian sought to explain the lives, decisions, and motivations of historical figures. His work established standards that influenced Chinese historians for centuries. Through literature, the Han Dynasty preserved its memory and documented its achievements. Future generations would understand the past largely because writers took the time to record it. Poetry and intellectual expression. Poetry occupied a special place in Han culture. Poets explored themes such as nature, family, love, duty, and the passage of time. Some works celebrated imperial achievements. Others reflected personal emotions and everyday experiences. Poetry allowed writers to express ideas in ways that ordinary prose could not. Many educated individuals considered poetry an essential part of cultural refinement. The tradition encouraged creativity while also demonstrating mastery of language. Poetic works circulated among scholars and contributed to the intellectual life of the empire. This literary culture would continue to flourish long after the Han Dynasty ended. Art in the Han world. Han artists produced a wide variety of works reflecting both practical needs and cultural values. Decorative carvings, paintings, sculptures, pottery, and metalwork appeared throughout the empire. Art often served multiple purposes. Some pieces decorated homes and public buildings. Others honored ancestors or accompanied the dead into the afterlife. Artists depicted scenes from daily life, mythology, history, and nature. Animals, landscapes, and human figures appeared frequently. The quality of craftsmanship demonstrated the skill and creativity of Han artisans. Art provided a window into the beliefs and experiences of the people who created it. Today, many surviving works continue to offer valuable insights into Han society. Tombs and the afterlife. The Han people devoted considerable attention to death and the afterlife. Many believed existence continued beyond the grave. As a result, tomb construction became an important cultural practice. Wealthy individuals often built elaborate burial sites containing objects intended for use in the next world. Archaeologists have discovered tombs filled with pottery, tools, weapons, jewelry, and miniature models of homes, animals, and servants. These items reflected both status and spiritual beliefs. One of the most famous examples is the burial of Liu Sheng, whose tomb contained a remarkable jade burial suit. Jade was believed to possess protective qualities and symbolized immortality. Such discoveries reveal how seriously the Han regarded life after death. Music, festivals, and celebration. Culture was not limited to scholars and artists. Ordinary people also participated in a rich tradition of music, festivals, and celebrations. Musical instruments accompanied ceremonies, religious rituals, and public events. Festivals marked seasonal changes and important occasions. Families gathered to celebrate traditions passed down through generations. These events strengthened community bonds and reinforced shared cultural values. Entertainment provided moments of joy amid the demands of daily life. Whether in rural villages or large cities, celebrations brought people together and helped preserve cultural identity. A civilization of learning and creativity. The Han Dynasty achieved far more than military victories and economic prosperity. It created a vibrant cultural world. Religious traditions helped people understand their place in the universe. Literature preserved knowledge and history. Artists expressed ideas through visual forms. Musicians and poets enriched daily life. New beliefs such as Buddhism entered China, while older traditions continued to evolve. These cultural achievements shaped the identity of the Han people and left a lasting legacy for future generations. Yet even the greatest civilizations faced challenges. As the Han Empire grew older, problems began to emerge. Political corruption spread. Powerful groups competed for influence. Economic inequalities increased. Rebellions threatened stability. The same empire that had achieved extraordinary success would soon confront a series of crises that endangered its future. The next chapter tells the story of the Han Dynasty's long decline. Chapter 11: Crisis and Decline. No empire lasts forever. No matter how powerful a civilization becomes, time eventually reveals its weaknesses. The Han Dynasty had expanded across vast territories. Its armies had defeated powerful enemies. Its economy had flourished. Its culture had influenced millions. For centuries, it stood as one of the greatest empires in the world. Yet beneath this success, problems were slowly growing. Some developed gradually over generations. Others emerged suddenly and with devastating consequences. Corruption weakened the government. Power struggles divided the court. Economic inequality increased. Natural disasters strained resources. Rebellions erupted across the countryside. By the 2nd century CE, the Han Empire faced challenges unlike any it had encountered before. The foundations that once seemed so strong were beginning to crack. The decline of the Han Dynasty would not happen overnight. It would unfold over decades, as one crisis after another pushed the empire closer to collapse. The problem of powerful families. As the Han Dynasty matured, wealth became increasingly concentrated in the hands of a small number of elite families. Large landowners expanded their estates. Successful aristocratic clans accumulated enormous resources. Many ordinary farmers struggled to compete. When harvests failed or debts mounted, some families were forced to sell their land. Wealthy landowners often purchased these properties, increasing their influence even further. Over time, the gap between rich and poor widened. This created serious problems for the government. The state relied heavily on taxes from independent farmers. As more land came under the control of powerful families, tax revenues declined. Some wealthy landowners used their influence to avoid taxes altogether. The government found itself collecting less money, even as challenges continued to grow. Economic inequality became a source of social tension throughout the empire. Corruption within the government. No administrative system is immune to corruption. Despite the Confucian ideals that guided Han governance, many officials failed to live up to the standards expected of them. Some abused their authority for personal gain. Others accepted bribes. Positions of influence sometimes went to individuals chosen for political connections rather than competence. Corruption weakened public trust. Ordinary people often felt disconnected from officials who seemed more interested in protecting themselves than serving the population. In some regions, local administrators exploited communities through unfair taxation or abuse of power. The problem became particularly damaging because the Han government depended on efficient administration. When officials failed in their responsibilities, the entire system suffered. Corruption alone did not destroy the dynasty, but it made solving other problems far more difficult. The rise of court factions. While ordinary people faced economic challenges, intense political struggles unfolded inside the imperial court. Different groups competed for influence over the emperor. Officials, nobles, scholars, and members of the imperial family all sought power. These rivalries often distracted leaders from the needs of the empire. Political opponents accused one another of corruption and disloyalty. Alliances formed and collapsed. Decision-making became increasingly difficult. Rather than working together to address national challenges, powerful individuals frequently focused on defeating their rivals. As factional conflict intensified, government effectiveness declined. The court became less capable of responding to crises. This instability would contribute significantly to the dynasty's decline. The growing power of the eunuchs. One of the most controversial developments during the later Han period involved the rise of eunuchs. Eunuchs were men who had been castrated and served within the imperial palace. Because they worked closely with members of the royal family, many gained direct access to the emperor. Over time, some eunuchs accumulated enormous influence. They controlled information reaching the throne. They developed networks of supporters. They participated in political struggles within the court. Many officials viewed their growing power with alarm. Conflicts between eunuchs and scholar officials became increasingly intense. Each side accused the other of corruption and misconduct. The resulting power struggles further weakened the government. Instead of focusing on national problems, influential figures often became consumed by internal political battles. Natural disasters and public hardship. Ancient societies depended heavily on agriculture. As a result, natural disasters could have devastating consequences. Throughout the later Han period, floods, droughts, earthquakes, and crop failures created immense suffering. When harvests failed, food shortages followed. Families faced hunger. Communities struggled to survive. The government often attempted to provide relief, but resources were limited. Repeated disasters placed additional strain on an already troubled system. Many people interpreted these events through the lens of the mandate of heaven. According to traditional belief, natural disasters could signal that heaven was dissatisfied with the ruling dynasty. As hardships increased, confidence in the government began to erode. Questions emerged. Had the Han emperors lost heaven's favor? Were these disasters signs of a deeper problem? Such concerns would become increasingly important as unrest spread across the empire. Population pressure and economic strain. The Han Empire's population had grown significantly during its centuries of prosperity. While population growth often supported economic development, it could also create challenges. More people required more land and resources. Competition for farmland increased. Opportunities became harder to find in some regions. Poor families often struggled to support themselves. Debt became a growing concern. Some farmers lost their independence and became tenants working on large estates. Others abandoned their land entirely. These economic pressures contributed to social instability. As frustrations mounted, more people became willing to support movements promising change. The conditions for widespread unrest were beginning to emerge. The Yellow Turban Rebellion. In 184 CE, one of the most significant uprisings in Chinese history erupted. Known as the Yellow Turban Rebellion, the movement attracted hundreds of thousands of followers. Its leader, Zhang Ju, combined religious teachings with promises of a better future. Supporters believed the existing order had become corrupt and unjust. They argued that a new era was about to begin. Participants wore yellow head coverings, giving the rebellion its famous name. The uprising spread rapidly across multiple provinces. Government forces eventually suppressed the rebellion, but the damage was immense. Entire regions were devastated. Large numbers of people died. Most importantly, the rebellion exposed the weakness of the Han government. The empire could still win battles, but maintaining long-term stability was becoming increasingly difficult. Warlords and regional armies. The suppression of the Yellow Turban Rebellion created a new problem. To defeat the rebels, the government relied heavily on regional military commanders. These leaders raised armies, gained local influence, and accumulated power. After the rebellion ended, many of these forces remained intact. Instead of disbanding their armies, some commanders used them to strengthen their own positions. Gradually, regional leaders became more independent from the central government. Their loyalty to the emperor weakened. The balance of power began shifting away from the imperial court. Local military strongmen emerged as major political players. The seeds of future conflict had been planted. The collapse of central authority. By the late 2nd century CE, the Han government struggled to maintain control. Court factions continued fighting for influence. Regional leaders grew increasingly powerful. Economic problems persisted. Public confidence declined. The emperor remained the symbolic ruler of China, but real authority was slipping away. Political assassinations, conspiracies, and military confrontations became increasingly common. The central government could no longer enforce its will throughout the empire. Different regions pursued their own interests. Unity began to unravel. What had once been a powerful centralized state was gradually fragmenting. The process accelerated with each passing year. The end of an era. The Han Dynasty had ruled China for more than 4 centuries. Its achievements were extraordinary. It expanded territory, encouraged trade, promoted learning, and established institutions that would influence future generations. Yet no amount of past success could shield it from present challenges. Corruption weakened governance. Economic inequality fueled resentment. Natural disasters created hardship. Political rivalries undermined stability. Rebellions exposed growing dissatisfaction. The empire was entering its final chapter. Soon, powerful warlords would compete for control of China. The authority of the emperor would become increasingly symbolic. The dynasty that had once unified and strengthened the Chinese world would finally collapse. Its fall would usher in one of the most famous periods in Chinese history, a time of rival kingdoms, legendary leaders, and endless warfare. The age of the Han was coming to an end. The age of the 3 kingdoms was about to begin. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. The Fall of the Han and Its Lasting Legacy. For more than 4 centuries, the Han Dynasty stood at the center of Chinese civilization. It survived rebellions, invasions, economic challenges, and political struggles. It expanded China's borders, strengthened its government, promoted trade, and helped shape a shared cultural identity. Generations had lived and died under Han rule. For many people, the dynasty seemed permanent. Yet by the late 2nd century CE, the empire was unraveling. The forces that had weakened the Han for decades could no longer be contained. Powerful warlords dominated entire regions. The imperial court was divided by corruption and factional conflict. The authority of the emperor existed more in theory than in reality. China was entering one of the most turbulent periods in its history. The fall of the Han Dynasty would mark the end of an era. But it would also begin a new chapter, one filled with legendary figures, epic battles, and political fragmentation. And despite its collapse, the Han Dynasty's influence would survive long after the empire itself disappeared. A throne without power. Following the turmoil of the late 2nd century, Han emperors found themselves increasingly powerless. Officially, they remained the rulers of China. Imperial decrees still carried the seal of the throne. Ceremonies continued. Titles remained intact. Yet real authority was slipping away. Regional military leaders controlled armies far larger than those available to the central government. These commanders collected taxes, governed territories, and made decisions independently. Many viewed the emperor as a useful symbol rather than a true ruler. The balance of power had shifted dramatically. The Han court could no longer effectively command the empire. Instead, it became a prize that competing warlords sought to control. The rise of Dongzhuo. One of the first major figures to exploit the dynasty's weakness was Dongzhuo. In 189 CE, political chaos erupted within the imperial court. Officials and military leaders competed for influence following the death of Emperor Ling. Amid the confusion, Dongzhuo marched his forces into the capital. He seized control of the government and positioned himself as the dominant power behind the throne. The young emperor became little more than a puppet. Dongzhuo's rule quickly earned widespread opposition. He governed through intimidation and violence. Many officials feared him. Regional leaders resented his growing power. His actions accelerated the collapse of central authority and encouraged rival warlords to organize against him. The struggle for China had entered a dangerous new phase. Warlords divide the empire. As confidence in the Han government collapsed, powerful regional leaders expanded their influence. Across China, warlords built armies and fortified their territories. Each hoped to secure power, protect their interests, or perhaps even reunify the country under their own leadership. Among the most important figures were Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Sun Quan. These men would become some of the most famous individuals in Chinese history. Their actions shaped the future of the Chinese world. As rival factions competed for territory, warfare intensified. Entire regions became battlefields. Cities changed hands repeatedly. Millions of people found themselves caught between competing armies. The dream of a unified empire was rapidly fading. Cao Cao and the Northern Power Base. Of all the emerging warlords, Cao Cao proved particularly formidable. A skilled administrator, military strategist, and politician, he gradually consolidated power across northern China. Unlike many rivals, Cao Cao recognized the importance of efficient government. He restored agricultural production in areas devastated by war. He recruited talented advisors, regardless of their background. He strengthened his armies through discipline and organization. Most importantly, he gained control of the emperor. By keeping the Han ruler under his protection, Cao Cao could claim legitimacy while pursuing his own ambitions. Many officials accepted his authority because he appeared to act in the emperor's name. Yet few doubted who truly held power. Cao Cao became the dominant force in northern China. The Battle of Red Cliffs. As his power grew, Cao Cao sought to reunify China. In 208 CE, he launched a massive campaign against southern rivals. His goal was simple: defeat his enemies and bring the entire empire under his control. Standing against him were the forces of Liu Bei and Sun Quan. Though smaller in number, they formed an alliance to resist Cao Cao's advance. The decisive confrontation occurred at the Battle of Red Cliffs. The battle became one of the most famous military engagements in Chinese history. According to traditional accounts, Allied commanders used fire attacks to devastating effect. Cao Cao's fleet suffered catastrophic losses. His invasion collapsed. The dream of immediate reunification disappeared. The outcome reshaped the political landscape. Instead of one dominant power controlling China, multiple rival states would emerge. The end of the Han Dynasty. Although the Han Dynasty had effectively lost control years earlier, it continued to exist officially for a short time. The final emperor remained on the throne, while powerful warlords governed the country. This arrangement could not last forever. In 220 CE, the last Han emperor, Emperor Xian of Han, formally abdicated. The dynasty was over. After more than 400 years, Han rule had come to an end. The event marked one of the most significant turning points in Chinese history. A new era had begun. The unified empire that once dominated East Asia no longer existed. In its place stood competing kingdoms, each claiming legitimacy and seeking supremacy. The Three Kingdoms era begins. Following the fall of the Han, China became divided among three major states: Kaowei, Shuhan, Eastern Wu. This period became known as the Three Kingdoms. For decades, these states competed for dominance. The era inspired countless stories, legends, poems, and works of literature. Military campaigns, political intrigue, and heroic figures captured the imagination of later generations. Even today, the Three Kingdoms period remains one of the most celebrated chapters of Chinese history. Yet its origins lay in the collapse of the Han Empire. Without the decline of the Han, the age of the Three Kingdoms would never have existed. Why the Han fell? Historians continue to debate the exact causes of the Han Dynasty's collapse. No single factor brought down the empire. Instead, multiple problems combined over time. Corruption weakened government institutions. Powerful landowners accumulated wealth and influence. Court factions fought for control. Eunuchs and officials engaged in bitter political struggles. Natural disasters created hardship. Economic inequality fueled resentment. Rebellions exposed deep social tensions. Regional military leaders became too powerful for the central government to control. Together, these challenges gradually undermined the foundations of the state. The Han Dynasty did not fall because of one disastrous event. It fell because decades of problems slowly eroded its ability to govern effectively. The legacy of Han government. Although the dynasty collapsed, many of its institutions survived. Future Chinese governments borrowed heavily from Han administrative practices. The centralized bureaucracy developed during the Han period became a model for later dynasties. Government officials continued to rely on record-keeping, taxation systems, and administrative structures refined during Han rule. Confucian principles remained deeply influential. Future rulers embraced many of the same ideas regarding education, morality, and governance. In this sense, the Han Dynasty never truly disappeared. Its political tradition became part of the foundation of Chinese civilization. The legacy of Han culture. The cultural influence of the Han Dynasty proved equally enduring. Literature, philosophy, art, and religious traditions continued to shape Chinese society long after the dynasty's fall. Confucian values remained central to education and family life. Historical works produced during the Han period influenced generations of scholars. Technological innovations such as paper spread across Asia and eventually around the world. Trade routes established during the Han era continued facilitating cultural exchange. The dynasty's achievements became a source of pride for future generations. Even centuries later, people looked back on the Han period as a golden age. The Han people. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the dynasty's legacy can be found in its name. Today, the majority ethnic group in China identifies itself as the Han people. This designation reflects the profound impact of the Han Dynasty on Chinese identity. Few empires have left such a lasting mark on the populations they once governed. The dynasty became more than a political institution. It became a symbol of cultural continuity. Its influence helped define language, traditions, social values, and national identity. The fact that hundreds of millions of people continue to use the name Han demonstrates the extraordinary reach of its legacy. The empire that shaped China, the Han Dynasty, rose from the chaos that followed the fall of the Qin Empire. It transformed a war-torn land into one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. Its rulers expanded territory, strengthened government, promoted trade, encouraged innovation, and fostered cultural development. For more than 4 centuries, the Han Empire influenced the lives of millions. Its eventual collapse brought an end to one chapter of Chinese history. But its achievements did not disappear. They survived in institutions, ideas, technologies, and traditions that continued shaping the future. The Han Dynasty may have fallen in 220 CE, but its legacy endured. And in many ways it still does. The story of the Han is not simply the story of an ancient empire. It is the story of how one civilization helped shape the course of Chinese history for the next 2,000 years.